It should be mandatory to provide your sources, primary sources if possible, and with specific excerpts if the source is very big, as a matter of course whenever you make a statement of fact on social media, especially a political one. Google is free isn't an excuse, it's a cop-out. What's up, guys? Acer Thorn here, and this is Purple Politics. Far too often, I come across people who make downright outlandish claims, but utterly fail to provide any sources to back up their claims. I even have an entire playlist on this channel where I call people out for making bold claims without providing an iota of evidence. When confronted on their bullshit, they often tell me that Google is free and it's not my job to educate you. Honey, if you weren't interested in educating anybody, why are you posting a video on TikTok or YouTube trying to tell people about this fact? Furthermore, the Google is free excuse isn't an excuse at all. It's a cop-out. After all, yes, it is free for both of us. So if I ask you for a source, it's literally just as easy for you to provide the source as it is for me to quote-unquote do my own research. Why should I have to sift through a haystack the size of the entire fucking internet just in search of some random-ass needle that I'm not convinced is even there, especially when you supposedly know exactly where the needle is and could just show me the damn needle? Even if you retort and say that you did in fact do your research and it didn't support your opponent's arguments, they'll probably just spout out some cop-out defense like, well, you obviously didn't do a very good job of Googling it. Fuck me. At that point, you literally just contradicted yourself. See, the Google is free argument purportedly states that my complete failure to do a simple Google search is the only potential explanation for my alleged ignorance. But now, you're claiming that I have to actually double down and try a full spectrum of search terms, otherwise it doesn't count as Googling it? Those two cannot both be true at the same time. At this point, you are, quite literally, making up the rules as you go along. And even if the latter were the case all along, how do you know that you aren't the one who didn't do a very good job of Googling it? Obviously, by arguing the latter, you are admitting that there is in fact a margin of error on these researches. So aside from your own ego, what honestly makes you think that it was me, not you, who overlooked something crucial? Surely you aren't that fucking vain? Here's an example of this logic at work. Back when the J.K. Rowling transphobia controversy was still fresh and being talked about, I went onto r/AskLGBT and asked for proof of what J.K. Rowling said that was so transphobic. I pointed out that the only tweets I ever saw that even remotely came in the orbit of transphobia was her insisting that biological sex was immutable and permanent. But she still insisted that trans people deserve rights and that she would even march alongside them in their fight for equality. The trans people on that subreddit told me that she then went on to continue to say truly horrific things that are undoubtedly transphobic.
Oh, what's that? You actually know of a few other tweets that are undeniably and unambiguously transphobic? Cool, can I see them, please?
Unfortunately, when I asked for them to show me these tweets, they just told me Google is free. When I told them that I did Google it and didn't find anything like what they described, they just replied and said, "Well, you obviously didn't do a very good job of it." Honey, if you have personal memories of reading a tweet from Rowling that really did cross the line, it should only take you about 30 seconds to find it and send me the link. What, am I supposed to sift through her entire history of media posts, which encompasses literally hundreds of thousands of tweets, until I stumble upon the needle in the haystack that you, quite vulgarly, insist is there but adamantly refuse to show me? Once in a blue moon, they might defer you to a source, only to make it an absolutely huge source, and then expect you to sit through the entire thing to find the golden needle that they're talking about. For example, regarding the murder of George Floyd, some police apologists, rather than insisting that I simply do my own research, deferred me to the full, uncut release of Officer Quing's body cam footage. I was then expected to watch literally every single second of this hour and 5-minute video. If I merely did that, they said, I would suddenly understand Chauvin's position. Seriously? Why can't you just point me to the timestamps where the important stuff happens? For example, at timestamp 3 minutes 30 seconds, all I can see are up-close shots of one officer's forearm hair. Surely you don't think me seeing that clip, where absolutely nothing interesting whatsoever went down, is somehow indispensable to me getting the quote-unquote full picture, do you? Seriously, can't you just give me some timestamps of all the highlights? Well, no, you can't do that, because if you did, and I watched those highlights and still wasn't persuaded to your side, you won't be able to fall back on the excuse that I didn't watch enough. Of course, even if I watch the whole thing, you'll still say I must not have been paying very close attention. Put simply, the excuse of "it's not my job to educate you" can only take you so far before it becomes an excuse for you to simply not admit that you're just making it all up. I'm happy to do my own research, but I am not happy to do your research for you. Earlier, I mentioned that by insisting that people do a thorough Google search, they're admitting that Google isn't the all-powerful godsend they claim it is. But that just leads me to my next point. Google is far from infallible. In fact, yes, Google is free to use. But have you ever heard the phrase, "you get what you pay for"? Google is a powerful tool, but it's only as powerful as the idiots who use them. To show you what I mean, let's take a look at one of my personal favorite YouTube videos on the subject, The Problem with Google is Free Activism by Rowan Ellis. I recommend everyone give that video a good watch since it's just so damn good, but one snippet I'd like to point out here can be found at timestamp 9 minutes 12 seconds through 9 minutes 27 seconds, where we get this little nugget of wisdom.
These featured snippets are chosen for a combination of reasons, including page popularity, how directly they answer the question, how many words they use to answer the question, even whether the information is in a list format. Not necessarily anything about how accurate the information is.
Not anything about how accurate it is?
Well then, how can we truly fall back on telling people to just Google it if Googling something doesn't even give us reliable and accurate information?
To be fair, it's hard to blame Google itself for this. First of all, they're a for-profit company, so it makes sense that they would prioritize search results that deliver the most profit. One could make the argument that this sort of algorithmic business model does more harm than good overall, but that's a discussion for another day. But even barring that, Google is not in any way qualified to decide the truth of 99% of factual statements out there. Sure, their little conversion tables can quickly and easily tell us how many miles are in 64.8 kilometers, or what the current time is in some city on Earth. But what about the facts that are actually debated? You know, the kind of facts that typically get tossed around in conversations where Google is free typically comes up? Google cannot possibly be expected to have a crack team of experts on every conceivable subject on hand to sort through information and personally decide what's true and what's not, especially for use in a tool that, as you often shout from the rooftops, is free for everybody. Instead, the best they can be expected to do is to simply lay out the facts and let the public decide what those facts mean. But that transitions me to my next point. Google can only give facts. It cannot give nuance. This is problematic for the very people who are often telling people Google is free, because the things being discussed are rarely as simple as what's the current time in the United Kingdom, or how many pounds are in 50 kilograms. All too often, many people who do indeed just Google it often come away with completely asinine conclusions. Take, for example, this TikTok from a guy named Yuval the Terrible, who was responding to a white supremacist named Daniel Schmidt. Schmidt is a guy who very clearly did just Google it, and yet, as Yuval demonstrates, his pre-existing racial biases clearly led him to draw the wrong conclusions from otherwise honest and accurate data. Google, by itself, is only just as smart as the person using it. In defense of telling people to just Google it, I have heard a handful of defenses. Not really defenses, more like excuses, as to why this is the lesser of two evils. None of them hold water, in my opinion. The most common excuse I hear thrown out is basically burnout. Marginalized groups allegedly are expected to be on call 24/7 to defend their status as marginalized, frequently being expected to give copious amounts of evidence about the pettiest of topics, evidence they have given countless times before, and often which is none of the asker's business, like how lesbians typically have sex. How the fuck is it any of your business how a lesbian gets herself or her girlfriend off? How does that detract from the fact that lesbians still have rights? Having to constantly answer and re-answer these questions over and over again ad infinitum gets really tedious really quickly. Or at least it would, were it not for one minor problem. At least in my experience, 99% of the time, these minorities are voluntarily throwing themselves into situations where their good faith participation is expected of them, and that expectation is 100% fair. Take, for example, my sources are for wusses playlist. Most of these shorts consist of nothing more than another creator making an outlandish claim, and then I fade to grayscale zooming in on their face and play the following clip.
That's a nice argument, Senator. Why don't you back it up with a source?
My source is that I made it the fuck up.
But think about that for a minute. These people still made the videos in the first place. By making these videos, they are directly opening themselves up to having their thoughts, opinions, and statements of fact subject to scrutiny by anyone online who may happen to come across them. You claim you're burnt out for having to constantly explain things to people, yet here you are explaining things to people. You just can't be bothered to provide proof of your claims, probably because you know you don't have any proof. Of course, by far the circumstance where I hear the Google is free argument the most often is when I ask for sources in the comments, only for other people, aside from the video uploader, to reply to those comments and say Google is free or just Google it or some variation thereof. These people were not previously involved in the discussion, yet they threw themselves into the discussion entirely of their own accord, and yet, despite doing only this nominal amount of effort, they still feel entitled to expect me to just Google it. Put simply, you can't claim that you're burnt out on explaining things to people ad nauseum when you're clearly getting involved in the discussion of your own accord. If you can't be bothered to follow through, don't get involved in the first place. If you don't have the stamina to play all 4 quarters of the game, don't join the fucking team. But of course, there are the times when the skeptics make the first move and ask for proof. Take, for example, this time when I posted on the r/AskLGBT subreddit asking in good faith for an explanation as to how gender dysphoria works. You can't see the thread anymore because it was removed by a moderator for some reason, but I still can show you the screenshot to show you what the original post said. Pause if you want to read it. As you can clearly see, I'm not being confrontational. I'm just asking for help understanding your condition better. Now, you could potentially argue that, since I'm the one initiating the conversation, everyone else has the right to claim burnout. But even then, there's another extenuating circumstance that defeats this argument. I'm literally asking the question on the Ask LGBT subreddit. This is a subreddit that is specifically designed for people to come and ask questions to the LGBT community. So if you're part of the LGBT community and you come to that subreddit and look at other people's posts with the intention of providing answers to some of them, then yes, you are indeed voluntarily resigning yourself to answering questions, which means you don't get to plead burnout when answering these questions. The only time I can think of when the burnout excuse has any merit is if the marginalized person is simply minding their own business, like an LGBT person or a black person who is merely streaming on Twitch, not trying to capitalize on their marginalized status for clicks like Zillion OP, but just playing a game and streaming it for fun. And then, out of nowhere, a bigot comes along and starts hurling inappropriate and uncomfortable questions at them about what it's like being marginalized. Then, yeah, they never signed up to be a spokesperson for jack shit, so they would be morally in the right to just tell that bigot to do their own research. You do not voluntarily sign up to defend your marginalized status simply by dint of being marginalized on the internet. That's not how it works.
Oftentimes, instead of claiming burnout, people will defend the lack of sources on the grounds that the facts being cited are common sense. Some people have literally commented on some of my videos and literally asked, why do you need resources when common sense tells you he's right? Also, he uses a period to end what is very clearly a question, if that gives you any indication as to how fucking stupid this person is.
Now, whereas the burnout may have some applicability, except for the fact that you clearly aren't as burnt out as you claim to be if you're still voluntarily engaging in the discourse, this excuse is ludicrous on its face. Frankly, what honestly makes you think it qualifies as common sense? Just because you personally consider it to be true? Newsflash, you fucking idiot! That is not the definition of common sense. That isn't even the definition of objective truth. Something is not true just because it fits your personal political narrative. In fact, it aligning with your existing political beliefs is all the more reason why you should fact check it before you start running your goddamn pie hole. Just how fucking vain are you that you think that your intuition is so impeccable that there's no need for you to fact check or verify anything as long as you personally consider it to be true? You fucking entitled twats! Now, that's not to say that the common sense exception is never applicable. But you really have to know for a fact that everyone knows about a particular fact before you can truly say it's common sense. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone. Take, for example, my video, BLM Riots Were Justified, Floyd's Murder Was Black and White. At timestamp 1 hour, 30 minutes, and 31 seconds through 1 hour, 4 minutes, 17 seconds, I say the following. Even discounting that victory that had already laid the foundation for them, we mustn't discount the extremely crucial first step to racial equality that had already been accomplished nearly a century prior, the abolition of slavery. And I got news for you, buddy, that absolutely did not come about in a peaceful manner. In fact, I'm actually going to break my own rule here and not provide a source to prove this, because frankly, if you don't already know about all the blood that was spilled in order to abolish slavery, you clearly have never taken a single U.S. history class in your entire miserable fucking life. See, that's the sort of overwhelmingly well-known facts that can truly qualify for common sense exception. Not just something that is well known within my personal social circle, but something that literally everyone knows about. At least everyone who has any business discussing American politics. But even then, I limit my lack of sources only to that one ultra-specific factoid that the abolition of slavery did not happen non-violently. I still provided sources for literally everything else, including giving my detailed explanation as to how that one ultra-specific factoid still factored into the overall grand picture. None of those things were passed off as common sense. However, if you smugly believe that something is common sense just because it supports your narrative, then you really are one of the most arrogant people in existence. It's hard to imagine how anybody can be that fucking vain, but some people really do post these comments unironically. So, what should we start doing? Well, for starters, we need to start demanding sources from people as a matter of course. Call people out and hold them to account whenever they make claims without providing sources. And don't let anyone tell you Google is free when you demand the sources from them. Also, don't praise people like me for providing our sources in the description. As for the ones making the claims, you need to stop being so source-phobic. You have someone's attention. You are in the middle of a discussion about the thing. There is really no better time to break it down and explain it. What, don't you want to actually convince people to join your cause? For that matter, you need to start providing your sources on your own. Don't wait for someone to demand sources before you provide them. Provide your sources when you first make the post. In fact, if you did that, it would probably cut back dramatically on the burnout that so many of you cite as the primary reason for not providing sources. After all, people would probably ask for sources less often if they already had the sources they would otherwise ask for, which would lead to less burnout on your end. Once you've made a comprehensive list of sources on the subject, you can then just link people to that video next time you get into an argument about the things you've already explained thoroughly, rather than having to painstakingly explain it again. Now, sure, sometimes there will be logistical difficulties to providing your sources. For example, TikTok doesn't have separate places for your title and description, so providing links in the description isn't exactly practical. However, many TikTokers, like Yuval the Terrible, who I mentioned earlier in this video, simply display their sources in the video itself as they discuss them. The one video about racism that I mentioned earlier can give you an idea of how that works. But even barring that, the caption section on TikTok, which serves as the app's title and description section all rolled into one, can take up to 4,000 characters. If you do what I do and simply put all your sources for each video into a Google Docs file, you can then take the link to that Google Docs file and post only that one link in the caption of your TikTok video. Google Docs links are only 92 characters long, much less than the 4,000 character limit for a TikTok caption, and you can reduce it to 79 characters if you chop off the /edit !tab equals t.0 at the end. The link will still work if you remove that part. And you can reduce it even further to 71 characters by removing the https:// at the beginning. With 4,000 characters allotted for your TikTok caption, if you can't spare less than 100 characters to squeeze in a link to your sources, you're doing something seriously wrong. Last but not least, even when you provide your sources, you have to accept that they aren't going to convince everybody, and they certainly aren't going to convince the majority of people immediately. If you expect to just flash a few sources in someone's face and they immediately turn an about face and convert to your side with no fuss or muss, you are just as smug and arrogant as the people I've been talking about this whole video, who think they shouldn't have to provide sources themselves simply because Google is free. Here's an example to show you what I'm talking about. A little over a year ago, I made a Reddit post discussing this very topic. One person, presumably a liberal, offered to show me the evidence that so many people previously had not shown that J.K. Rowling was indeed transphobic. One of the sources he provided me was a YouTube video over 2 hours long. Now, if you go to this webpage again, you'll find that his comments have been deleted by the mods. But fortunately, I have the footage of these comments recorded in a video back when the comments were still brand new. As you can see from this video, he appeared at first glance to engage in good faith. However, as you can see from me highlighting the timestamps, his first comment, which contained the link to the 2-hour video, was 2 hours old at the time of recording, but his accusation that I don't care enough to watch them was 44 minutes old at the time of recording, meaning that his first comment was approximately 1.5 hours old at the time he accused me of not caring enough to watch it. So think about that for a minute. Even if I dropped everything I was doing to watch that video right that instant, and even if I were able to watch the whole thing in one go, I still couldn't possibly have watched the whole video in that amount of time, even if I wanted to, and yet he still accuses me of not watching it. Not because of inability, but because I just don't care. Barring that, even if I were to watch the whole video and also review all of his other sources cover to cover, there's still another glaring problem with this person's logic. He expects me to change my view on the spot. He expects to give me just one round of so-called evidence, if he even gives that much, and if I don't immediately convert to his beliefs, even if I literally haven't had enough time to read it all just yet, then I must be beyond redemption. Just relegate me to the pit of lost causes. There's no hope for me. The only people who would convert so quickly have already been converted to one side or the other. If someone is acting in a good faith desire to hear both sides and consider both sides, they're going to first listen to each side's evidence, and then they're going to take that information to bed with them, let it slowly digest in their brains, weigh the new evidence alongside the facts they already knew, recalculate everything, and then come to a new decision, which can take days, if not weeks, of deliberation, depending on how busy they are with other stuff like their job or taking care of their kids. And all of that is the best case scenario. That's assuming they don't immediately find significant flaws in your so-called evidence, like I did with the tweet where J.K. Rowling criticized a 2-time convicted rapist who attempted to transfer to the women's prison by claiming he now identified as a woman, and immediately discredit your sources right then and there. But even if that happens, then instead of throwing a fit and immediately relegating me to the pit of lost causes, you should instead change your game plan and respond to my rebuttal arguments. Just remember that there is a difference, a huge difference, between me being unwilling to listen to reason versus me listening to your evidence, hearing you out in full, and not being persuaded to your side because your arguments are unpersuasive. Remember that. At the end of the day, yes, some people just cannot be convinced. But rather than simply telling them Google is free, you're honestly best off just not engaging with them at all. And for those of us who are willing to engage in good faith, the best thing you can possibly do is provide the sources. Waiting for people to reject what they've always been told as true
by themselves is a damn slow way to make change. If providing sources is so inconvenient to you that you want to offload that duty onto others, maybe consider the possibility, just the 1 in a million possibility, that it might be equally inconvenient for them too, and then give them the benefit of the doubt accordingly. And when you do provide evidence, don't expect your audience to just immediately convert, like police who realize the suspect they have in custody has DNA that definitively isn't a match for the crime scene, so they have no choice but to accept that he's innocent just on that evidence alone. Evidence, especially for sensitive and controversial political topics, is almost never as cut and dry as that, no matter how much you personally think your batch of evidence is. People have the right to take their own thoughts, feelings, and priorities into account. And if, after they've had several days to consider your new evidence, they still haven't changed their viewpoint, then before you write them off as merely a bigot who refuses to see reason, consider the possibility, just the possibility, that your evidence might actually be pretty weak sauce in the grand scheme of things, and that you only consider it so powerful because it suits your narrative, rather than your audience ignoring it simply because it doesn't suit theirs. That's not always how it's going to be, but it's a possibility you shouldn't dismiss out of hand either. So that was my take on the importance of sources. If you disagree with my take, feel free to post a comment. I welcome civil discussion on the matter. I also am looking for people to debate me on livestream on multiple topics, so fill out the form in the pinned comment if you're interested. In the meantime, however, I am Acer Thorn, and this has been Purple Politics.